Hi, we're on chapter 16. It's called Discipline That Does Not Divide. So, how do we impose order on a child's behavior that doesn't work that doesn't just work in the short term, but keeps the relationship intact? Punishment creates an adversarial relationship and causes emotional hardening. Time outs to teach a lesson. Um, so timeout is fine as long as you take a timeout together to calm down. Um, but if you're using it to, get away from me, you're, to punish, or tough love to bring behavior in line. I don't know if you've heard that term where you're like being very stern, but you feel like it's the loving right thing to do, but it is a punitive thing. 1, 2, 3 magic, which is like you counting, clean up your room. I'm gonna 1, 2, and by 3 they're in trouble. They make kids comply, so they do work in the short term usually, but they put a strain on the relationship. When we ignore a child in response to a tantrum, so sometimes people say just ignore them. And some things you can ignore, little things, but when they're really in distress, they need you. Isolate the misbehaving child, or withdraw your affection. Then we undermine the child's security. Ordering children around provokes counterwill, as does bribing them with rewards. We think of rewards as a positive thing. I mean, it is more positive than punishing, but it's just the flip side of the coin. And it often ends up backfiring that they want rewards for everything and they don't enjoy the activity for what it is anymore. So, all of those things, like, stay away from them as much as you can. So, what's left for the parent to use? You might wonder, because these are all the traditional things. Gordon Neufeld uses the term discipline, not in the narrow sense of punishment, but in its deeper meaning of training, bringing under control, imposing order on. Children are in need of discipline that doesn't damage the relationship. We do not require strategies as parents, even though sometimes we think we want a strategy, but they just work in the short term. But we need compassion, principles, and insight. As we work to bring attachment values into action, most of us may have to struggle with our own impulsive reactions and our own immaturity, with our own inner conflict. Above all, we may have to deal with feelings of futility when things we try don't work, like we're people too, and it is hard. We must feel the sadness and disappointment. Emotional hardening will only leave us rigid and ineffective. So feel your feelings around around all of it. It's a big job. So Gordon Neufeld came up with 7 disciplines, and they could just as well be entitled 7 disciplines for parents. They involve bringing yourself under control and working systematically towards a goal. Our ability to manage a child effectively is very much an outcome of our capacity to manage ourselves. We need to find the same compassion for ourselves that we wish to extend to our child. So, for example, the answer to a lack of self control on our part is not to punish ourselves or to nag ourselves to be good. Such methods don't work for us and they don't work for our kids. We need to accept that sometimes our darker emotions get the better of us. It'll happen. Our rage can arise despite our love for our child. It's best to put ourselves on hold until more loving impulses arise again. Maybe you can hand your parenting duties temporarily over to your partner or to a trusted adult. While you take a turn to find your mixed feelings, regain control, balance, perspective, and wisdom. Be the parent you really want to be. Discipline should not and need not be adversarial. It's not our children's fault that they're born uncivilized and immature. They're kids. The discipline for parents is to work only in the context of connection. If a parent is trashing her child verbally in Gordon Neufeld's office, he asks the parent to stop for a minute and to feel her connection to her child and then talk about the concern again. He says it's amazing how differently we can view a situation when we have found our connection again with our child. That becomes very true, doesn't it, when somebody else bashes our child? Suddenly, oh, we protect them and defend them. So try to connect to those feelings about your child and view them that way. When we use old-fashioned discipline, we disrupt the contact and connection, and the child's attachment brain is in high alert, and the child feels anxious. When you think back to your own childhood, I'm sure some of that stuff was used on you. I know it was on me on occasion. And yeah, it doesn't serve to teach you any kind of lesson. It just makes you more mad or anxious. The child's response will vary depending on the way they attach. If a child attaches to preserving contact by being good, he will desperately promise never to be bad again. His attempt to regain connection will bring a stream of I'm sorries. The child whose way of staying close is through affectionate gestures and words will, when he feels his attachment threatened by the parent, become full of I love yous, I love you. If physical contact is most important, the child may become clingy for a few hours. It's important for the parent to know that the child hasn't really learned a lesson. So when they're like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, it's not that they now know how to be better next time or anything. They're just desperate to reconnect with you. There's a high cost to playing the separation card, and separation not just physically but emotionally. It makes children feel insecure. The child disciplined by means of separation can only count on closeness with the parent when they measure up to the parent's expectations, and that's hard. They're just learning. The child may become very good, but the development is sabotaged because there won't be any emergent energy. And emergent energy, remember, is the energy of like asking questions and like learning through mistakes and all of that. So if you're feeling really scared and like it stifles you, it might stifle you into behaving really well, like you might if you have a really strict teacher or whatever. But whether you're learning much in that environment is the other question, or if you're just sitting there in fear and frozen and you're just going through the motions of behaving. The threat of separation works only because the child is attached to us, craves closeness with us, and is not emotionally defended against vulnerability. Yet, anyway. If these conditions do not exist, separation is ineffective as an instrument of compliance. So, you know, with older teenagers, if they're already peer-oriented and you try all these methods, they'll just be like, whatever, I don't even care. So it only works while they still really desperately care and you're using it against them, basically. So even when it does work, any success will only be temporary. Whether it is physical or emotional withdrawal, the child's sensitivities are likely to be overwhelmed. If we adults feel hurt if somebody ignores us or shuns us, imagine what it does to kids. By using timeouts and reacting in ways that break the connection, we are effectively throwing our kids to their peers. So like we talked about in other chapters, if we use methods that push them away from us, we'll push them towards peers. They also might react by resisting contact with us by hiding under the bed or in the closet to try and tell the parent to leave them alone when they try to reconcile. So if your child is like, running away, hiding, and you come back and you're trying to make up, and they're like, "Leave me alone," it means that discipline was harsh, and they're now a little bit scared and insecure. The experience of separation will trigger a child's instincts to detach from us. It makes sense, right? If we try to nip aggression in the bud by using punitive timeouts or other disciplines that divide, we just fuel the aggression by causing more frustration instead of helping them accept futility and finding their tears. The positive and natural alternative to separation is connection. The trick is to be mindful of connection before a problem arises instead of imposing separation afterwards. So sometimes you can prevent a problem from happening by having a strong connection. One of the ways we can engage the attachment instinct is to make it easier to parent, is by connecting before directing. We touched on this in chapter 14. If we take the time to connect first, we minimize the risk of resistance. So, if they're busy playing with the toy and you need them to come over and have supper or to get going or whatever, take a few minutes to go over, see what they're doing, show some interest, smile, ask a few interested questions or whatever, and then say, "This looks really cool. I know you're having lots of fun, but you know what? Right now we got to do this and that. And then after we'll come back and we'll play some more and you can show me what you're doing." And, once you're on the same team kind of thing, they're much more likely to comply with you instead of you just out of the blue yanking them away from whatever they're doing and not showing any empathy or interest or compassion for how important that is to them at that time. So when a problem occurs, work the relationship, not the incident. When something goes wrong, the usual response is to confront the behavior in question because the behavior is in your face. And you want to do it right away lots of times, kind of because that's what we've been told and we feel like an urgency around it. Gordon Neufeld says that's important when you're training an animal because they won't remember later their capacity. Like, we can only communicate so much with them, so we got to tell them right now. Children have consciousness and we can communicate with them. And it's offensive to adults and to kids to misjudge their intentions and insult their abilities and kind of treat them like your doggy training. Also, another reason to not do it in the moment when everybody's really upset is the child is likely to be out of control. Choosing a moment like this to correct, direct, or teach a lesson is a waste of time. Their brain's turned off. It's elsewhere. As for us, the inappropriate behavior of our child often catches us by surprise, evoking intense emotional reactions. So our behavior, just like that of our child, is more likely to be untempered. Another reason to wait and not deal with the situation right now. I mean, if you're totally stressed out, you're in high traffic or whatever, and you honk, and your husband tells you, "Don't honk, that's rude," or whatever, and trying to give you a driving lesson or whatever, you might have a hard time taking that in or taking that well while you're under high stress. It's better to have that conversation when everything has calmed down again. So same with kids, or even more so for kids. Addressing problems requires thoughtful preparation. With the relationship in mind, the immediate objective is to stop the behavior and to preserve a working attachment. So, one kid's hitting another with a stick, stop that. You can stop that from happening. But at the same time, don't shout anything really impulsive at the time when your emotions are high. Just stop it from happening. And then once everybody's calmed down, talk calmly and deal with it. We can always revisit the incident and the behavior later once we have calmed and the intense feelings, calm the intense feelings and reestablish the connection. Some behaviors push our buttons and test our ability to stay attached to our child, for sure. I'm sure everybody who has kids who are not infants anymore has noticed that. Aggression and counter will are at the top, no surprise there. If we allow our feelings of victimization to dominate, we cannot maintain the role of the adult in charge. So if you take it really personally when they're yelling immature, silly things, or I hate you, or whatever at you, and then you get hurt feelings, and then you retaliate by getting really mad, then you're not really the wise adult in charge anymore, right? Um, Focusing on the frustration instead of taking the attack personally will often help. So focusing on their frustration, like the underlying reason for why they're attacking. You're very frustrated. You wanted me to say yes, and I said no. And match your face to the frustration level, so they feel like you're getting them. If you're saying you're very frustrated, they probably don't think you're understanding. But if you're saying you're really frustrated right now, then they feel like, oh yeah, you understand. Yeah, I'm really frustrated right now. Sometimes it helps to throw an infraction flag. This is no good. We'll talk about this later. You don't have to get like all aggressive about it, because then everything gets like just, your thinking gets clouded by fear again. So don't make it too threatening, but you can say, hey, stop, let's talk about this later. We need to restore calm in ourselves and our child before attempting to draw lessons from what happened. And I kind of feel like you don't always have to even draw a lesson. I mean, sometimes it's important when they really don't know that you explain what they should be doing instead. But sometimes with older kids, they know full well. You don't need to drive home the point. You can just say, yeah, about earlier, I guess you know what should have happened. And they can tell you. When things aren't working for the child, draw the tears instead of trying to teach a lesson. A child has to learn sharing mommy with a sibling, handling frustration and disappointment, to live with imperfection, to let go of demands, to be the center, to not be the center of attention all the time, to be told no. Those are only a few of the many, many things kids have to learn that, aren't always going to go their way. Many life lessons aren't so much a result of correct thinking, but of adaptation. The key to adaptation is for futility to sink in whenever we're up against something that doesn't work and we can't change. When the adaptation process is unfolding as it should, the lessons are learned spontaneously. These lessons can't be taught directly through reason or through consequences. They're teachings of the heart, learned only when futility sinks in. The parents need to be an agent of futility and an angel of comfort. So, two things, because you're the one in the lead, so you sometimes need to say no, and then you need to be there to comfort them. So, first comes of all of futility. For example, your sister said no. I can't let you do that, or there isn't enough. These realities need to be presented firmly so that they don't become the issue, so they don't try to find a way around it, and keep nagging and arguing and stuff. Like, if you're saying it's because blah, 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 and give a big, long explanation, then it's harder for them to find their sadness around it. To explain, the failure to stand firm when something can't be changed provokes the child to seek escape routes from reality. There's time to convey your reasons, but only after the futility of changing things has been accepted. So once they cry and they accept that this is the way it is, you can say, yeah, I know, I wish it would have been otherwise, blah, 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 whatever. The second part of the adaptation dance is to provide comfort once the child has accepted the futility and feels sad. Your job is to move frustration to sadness. We can say things like, it's hard when things don't work. I know you really wanted this to happen, I wish things could have been different. So put some feelings of empathy into your words so that they know, you understand and you feel for them. Uh, the exact words don't matter that much. It's the feeling of being understood and the feeling that we're with them and not against them. If the child's already defended against vulnerability, they won't be moved to tears, and we will need to adapt and find something else that works. And fortunately, there are other things that work. So another thing we can do is solicit good intentions instead of demanding good behavior. Intentions are generally undervalued. Our society generally thinks intentions aren't good enough. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, is a saying. For a developmental perspective, good intentions are like gold. Intention is the seed of values and the precursor of a sense of responsibility. I mean, for us as parents too, right? The first step is to have intentions of being a good parent and learning how to take the steps to do so. And we might also mess up along the way, but if our intentions are good, we can keep getting back on track, and there is hope. It sets the stage, like having good intentions sets the stage for mixed feelings. And Gordon Neufeld talked about that before, how important our mixed feelings are. So we don't just feel one feeling at a time, like rage. We also still know that we love our children, and that helps us respond in the appropriate way to them. Same with our kids. They need to have those mixed feelings, which unfortunately take a while to come in. So for little kids, this is a really tricky one. Our objective, whenever possible, so you might have to wait until they're more mature, but when they're at that stage, our objective, whenever possible, should be to solicit good intentions in the child. Success requires that the child wants to be good for us and is open to being influenced by us and is old enough to understand what and feel those mixed feelings. But you can work on that even when they're younger. Just don't expect them to get it right away. So the first step is to collect the child, collect their smile, their nods, say something friendly. Next, we use our influence to coax the child in the right direction. It isn't enough for children to know what we want. The intention to comply must be their own. So it's not just that, they know what we expect from them. They have to feel that they want to do it. So for example, for a toddler who doesn't want to leave, you first collect him, then prime an intention that will get him going in the desired direction. So you maybe go, oh, you had so much fun playing. I know it's hard to leave right now, but you know what? I need your help to carry this bag out to the car for me. Can you help me with that? And usually they're super eager and want to help you. Just like an amusement park ride where you can sit in those cars where there's a steering wheel, but they're really on tracks and you only have so much control. Kids need to feel like they're in control, even though, you're making sure the control is within a realm where it makes sense for them. Better yet, is to anticipate problems before they occur by appealing to the child's own sense of mastery. So for example, if you know you're going to meet resistance when it's time to go, you can collect time beforehand, like you can collect them beforehand and solicit an intention to come when you say it's time to leave. So you tell them, so when it's time to leave, will you be ready to get your shoes on? It might be really hard, like you can acknowledge that it might be really hard because you might have a really good time playing and it's hard to leave, but I think you can do it. So, give them like a little challenge of maturity that, I know this is usually hard when it's time to leave, but this time, I think, when I tell you, you'll be able to get your own shoes on and help me get ready and out the door. And when when they nod and, agree to it, then you have a much better chance that it will actually happen. Um, Soliciting good intentions in older children involves sharing with them your own values or finding within them the seeds of your values. For example, I'm always proud of myself when I can feel frustrated without insulting anyone. I think you're old enough now to give it a try. What do you think? Are you willing to work on it? So, with older kids, you can kind of get them on board with something. Soliciting good intentions will not automatically result in the desired behavior, but the child has to start somewhere, and aiming in the right direction is where to begin. In soliciting good intentions, we're trying to draw attention not to our will, but to the child's. Instead of I want you to, you have to. Try saying things like, can I count on you to do whatever? Are you ready to? Are you willing to give it a try? Of course, there are times when you have to impose our will. I mean, you can't go, are you willing to sit in the car seat? They have to sit in the car seat whether they want to or not. So, I mean, oftentimes we have to impose our will. So try doing it the other way to solicit their intentions when it is possible. It's essential to acknowledge a child's good intentions instead of identifying him with his impulses, actions, or failures. The parent needs to be as supportive and encouraging as possible. I know that's not what you wanted to happen. I'm glad you didn't mean to. That's important. Unless we take the sting out of the inevitable failures, the child will be tempted to give up. I know we had a birthday party one time with my youngest child, and one of his friends was really upsetting my son, and then he came in and he looked very embarrassed. And luckily I have two older kids and I've been through lots of different incidences, and I said, I know that's not what you meant to happen. And he was very relieved that I could see his side in it. So it's always nice when you can come alongside and go, I know that's not what you meant, maybe they did at the very time, but in the grand scheme of things, they didn't want this result to happen. I mean, they had maybe fun whacking everybody with pool noodles or whatever they were doing, but they didn't mean to upset them, and they didn't see that consequence coming in the middle of having fun. If we can't manage to solicit good intentions, either the child isn't mature enough, or we aren't persuasive enough, or there's a problem in the attachment relationship. So we need to look at that. So another thing we can do is to draw out mixed feelings instead of trying to stop impulsive behavior. Stop hitting, don't interrupt, stop being so hyper. Those are all things we parents often yell at their kids. Trying to stop impulsive behavior is like standing in front of a freight train and commanding it to stop. It's hard when they're in the middle of being totally wound up. Many of a child's responses are driven by instincts and emotions that arise spontaneously and automatically, not from conscious decisions. They're not doing this to drive you crazy. The fearful child is following instinctual orders to avoid. The insecure child may be compelled to cling and hold on. Frustration often induces a child to demand, to cry, or to attack. The shamed child is under orders from their brain to hide or conceal. The resistant child automatically counters the will of others. When a child is impulsive, impulses rule, the brain is only doing its job in moving the child according to emotions and instincts activated. There's an alternative to confrontation. The key to self-control is not willpower, as we once thought, but mixed feelings. It's when conflicting impulses mix together that the orders cancel each other out, putting the child in the driver's seat. This works for us too, right? If we, there's the one impulse telling us to eat this piece of cake and the other one's saying, but I shouldn't, it's not healthy, or whatever. So if there's a good mix, we might not go ahead and do what our impulse tells us. It's our job to bring the conflicting feelings and thought into the child's consciousness. When we coax conflicting feelings into consciousness, we need to get outside the incident and inside the relationship once the intensity of the feelings have eased somewhat. So again, like before when we were saying, while everybody's hot-headed, your brain's not really functioning all that well. So wait until everything's calmed down, and then you can work on something like mixed feelings, which again takes a certain amount of maturity and age and all of that for it to work, but you can start it at any age. Just don't expect results right away. We're having such a good time together right now. I remember this morning when you weren't too happy with me. You got really mad at me. Isn't it surprising that sometimes the way we can get so mad at the ones we love? So you can have a conversation like this with an older child, right? And address something that happened earlier. But if they're in the middle of screaming, "I hate you," and you say, "It's not nice, you love me," they don't believe you in that moment, right? You can bring it up later. Discipline of this kind draws children to us instead of pushing them away. We often tell children to cut it out, but it's impossible to cut out the feelings they have unless their feelings have been numbed already, which we don't want that. What we really need to do is add something in, and that's the conflicting feelings, which will help them, facilitate mixed feelings and a more tempered reaction to things. So another thing we can do is, when dealing with an impulsive child, try scripting the desired behavior instead of demanding maturity. Not all children are ready for the more advanced ways of teaching discipline we have so far discussed. If they have not developed mixed feelings, not even the most skilled parent can teach them to be tempered. Children who have trouble with self-control also lack the ability to recognize the impact of their behavior or to anticipate the consequences. Obviously, right, the kids who don't have self-control yet can't really think ahead. And when our brain isn't functioning because we're really upset, we also don't plan ahead very well either. They're not able to think twice before acting or see someone else's point of view that's different from their own when they don't have the level of maturity or self-control yet. These children are often judged to be insensitive, selfish, uncooperative, or uncaring, because it is often really shocking when you see kids do something really impulsive, right? Like you see it with siblings often, and you feel very protective of a younger sibling generally, and you see the older one doing something that looks really mean, then you feel like the older one is a monster. But really, they're just immature still. They don't have mixed feelings at that time when they're doing this. All they have is their frustration. So they still have to learn. If we perceive them in this negative way, it sets us up to get frustrated at their behavior and to make demands that they can't possibly fulfill. So, we can't expect them to have mixed feelings when they don't have them yet. It doesn't matter how much we yell and scream. It's just not going to make them more mature or punish or whatever. Children who have a one-dimensional awareness can't even follow simple demands like don't be rude, don't interrupt, be nice, be fair, etc. He calls these simple demands, but it's actually not that simple to be told to be nice. That's pretty vague. That encompasses like a huge spectrum, and like none of us can be nice all the time, right? So it's actually, we think those are straightforward things we're asking of them, but it's actually not that easy to comply to that. We can't get our children to be more mature than they are. Expecting them to do the impossible is frustrating, and worse, suggests there's something wrong with them. You also wouldn't want somebody to suggest something is wrong with you as a parent if you mess up at times, because we all do. We need to stop having unrealistic demands and expectations. Often we expect more of children than we expect of other adults, and that's not fair. Rather than demanding that they spontaneously become more mature, We could script the desired behavior. Following our directions won't make them more mature, but it will help them to function in social situations that they would otherwise not be developmentally ready for. To script a child's behavior is to provide the cues and how to do it. This is how you hold the baby. We pet the cat like this. It's daddy's turn to talk like right now. Those are examples of scripting. And we usually do this with younger children, but sometimes kids who are a little bit older still need it too. We always start by collecting the child, making sure we have their attention, their smile, their nod, and all of that before saying anything, or else it's pointless if their focus is totally elsewhere. It doesn't work to give negative instructions. So if we say, don't pull the dog's tail, sometimes all they hear is pull the dog's tail, and they do it. I've heard that in golf, instead of telling yourself not to hit the sand pit, to give yourself positive instructions too, because if you say, make sure you don't hit the sand pit, you will hit the sand pit. So even adult brains work like that. So word it in a positive way. Modeling the behavior you want the child to follow is even more effective than saying what you want them to do. Like when we say, pet the cat nicely, show them how to do it, what nicely means. Nicely, gently, show them. Because they don't often have a concept of all the stuff we're telling them. So he says, like, for example, when you're teaching a child how to ski, maybe you don't ski, if you can't relate to that, think of teaching them how to ride a bike. We don't just give them verbal instructions. We don't just say, get your balance, don't fall, slow down, stay in control, and expect them to be able to do that. We get a lot more hands-on. We support them while they're doing it. We show them, and we show them one step at a time. So we really slow it down. And we have a lot of patience teaching them a new skill like that. We need to be patient teaching them social interactions because they're actually very complex and very difficult, and we don't always do well at them. So keep that in mind, that that's a skill they have to learn. It's not a character flaw if they don't know how to do it right away. So when it comes to social behavior, we must not focus on the relationship between children, but for them to take their cues from us. Like, don't expect the kids to figure it out amongst themselves. They don't know how. They have to take their cues from us. So he gives an example of a really amazing teacher that the kids really loved. It was a grade 2 teacher, and she had one little boy in the class with special needs who had gone to the bathroom, came back in the room, stood there very proudly and said, I did it all by myself this time. But he was completely unaware that his pants and underwear were still down by his ankles. And all the students looked at the teacher to see how she would react to this. And the teacher said, wow, I'm so proud. Good job. And then all the other kids like applauded him too, and had a really positive reaction rather than maybe laughing at him or something. So what happened was that the kids did not know how to react in this kind of social situation. They didn't know what an appropriate, a nice reaction would be. So they looked at their teacher to cue them, basically, and the teacher was a very gentle, loving person who knew what mattered, right? In this instance, it doesn't matter his pants are still down. It matters that he accomplished something big, something new, and then after you could ask him, oh, okay, and now pull up your pants, or do you need help pulling up your pants, or whatever. Don't make a big deal about the part that you didn't do. Yeah, so it just shows like how you set an example in your actions and in your tone and everything. Immature beings should not be left to their own devices in social interactions. Of course, you can't be with them all the time and script everything they say. So they're going to be left to their own devices to a certain degree. But when there are issues, they often don't know how to resolve them themselves. So you can listen in a little bit. If things are going woo, then get in there and help them out because they need your help. You're their teacher. Many kinds of behaviors can be scripted. fairness, helping, sharing, cooperation, conversation, um, gentleness, consideration, and getting along. They watch you, they hear what you say, they copy you, and they listen to your script when you tell them how to handle a situation. When they're still young enough and connected and attached to you, that they want to listen to you. Helping children stay out of trouble by scripting their behavior safeguards their attachment to us and ours to them, because then we don't get to that level of frustration. So another thing we can do is, when unable to change the child, then we can change the child's world. We do this for infants, that we child-proof the environment, but we can also do this regarding discipline. So Gordon Neufeld says, the less children are in need of discipline, the more effective any method will be. So, which is true, right? So kids who don't actually need you to discipline them much, if you do something, it works generally really well on them. But the more a child is in need of discipline, because they're very impulsive, the less effective the commonly taught discipline methods will be. It's difficult to discipline a child who doesn't consider the thoughts and feelings that keep troubling impulses in check, who can't be brought to form good intentions, and is unable to feel the futility of a course of action and lacks the motivation to be good for those in charge. So this makes it really hard. With such children, the temptation is to become more heavy-handed. Unfortunately, adding force usually backfires for the same reasons the child is more difficult to discipline in the first place. So coercion leads to counterwill. Punishment provokes retaliation. You keep having to up the ante to the point where it's like you don't even know what to do anymore. Yelling leads to tuning out. Sanctions evoke aggression. Timeouts can lead to emotional detachment. So when reasonable amounts of discipline do not work, the answer is not to discipline harder, but to discipline differently. Instead of trying to change the child, it would make more sense whenever possible to change the situation and circumstances that trigger the problem behavior. I mean, you know that sometimes if you or your child get hungry or thirsty, you get cranky, right? So if you get food or drink, that can change everything. So sometimes just like a simple change like that can change everything. This approach requires three things on the parent. First of all, the ability to feel the futility of other discipline methods and let go of what doesn't work. Then number two, the insight into what factors into the child's environment trigger the troublesome behavior. So what in the child's what in the child's environment triggers the troublesome behavior? Some ability to change or control these adverse factors is the third one. So insight is key. Parents need to get past the problem behavior to see what the child is reacting to. So, we tend to focus on the problem behavior, but try to be more of a detective about it, like what's going on here. How we see the problem will determine what we do about it. If we perceive the child as willful, we will try to change his behavior. If we see the child as getting carried away by his impulses, we are more likely to want to change the situation that evokes those impulses in the first place. If we see a child hitting and see the child as being willful, we're going to focus on the behavior. If we see the child as having trouble handling his frustrations, we might try and change the circumstances that frustrate him. If a child is defying our demands to stay in bed at bedtime, we might treat that as an area of disobedience. If we see it as a young child who is scared of the separation or the darkness, we might make bedtime less threatening. So there's lots of different scenarios, and we can look at it this way or that way. If a child doesn't do as they're told, you might think, oh, they're resisting us and defying us. Or you might realize there's some counterwill there, and maybe we're pushing too hard, and we might have to lay off a little bit. If a child is refusing to communicate, for example, I used to not say thank you when my mom asked me to say thank you. I wasn't being rude, I was shy. So there are different reasons, and sometimes if you know your child and you know the reason, then you don't look at it as negatively. Sometimes a child lies. You can look at them as a liar, which I guess they are when they're lying, but there can be an underlying reason. Like sometimes they don't want to disappoint us. I remember my parents asked me, "Did you brush your teeth this morning?" And I said, "Yes." I didn't, but I didn't want to let them know that I actually hadn't because I didn't want to disappoint them. But I did make sure to brush my teeth after secretly. So, I mean, there might be underlying reasons, and if you know your child well, you can figure out what it is and look at it from that perspective. And all the situations are interventions are only going to be as effective as our insight is sound. If the child's environment is affecting her behavior, that behavior is out of her and our control. So it makes sense to shift our focus from the child's behavior to what provoked it. That's not something we can continuously do. We can't remove all obstacles from their lives at all times so that they only feel happy all the time and never feel any frustration and therefore never feel like reacting out of frustration. You can only do that to a certain extent. He says if you are able to encourage a positive change in the child, then do that, and you don't need to change the environment. Only do that around circumstances where you feel like they're having a particularly hard time, and if you can see, the underlying reason, and there's a good way to change it. One way to change an environment or just to make life easier and make it easier for them to behave, basically, is by having structure and routine. It's a powerful way of imposing order in a child's world and therefore on their behavior, and it also makes them feel secure lots of times and know what's expected. Structures need to be created around meal times, bedtimes, all the times, that might be difficult, but they can also be put in place for fun times, creative times, like story time, like a time to connect with each other, just like you might have a structure of every Friday's date night or something like that. Homework, practicing piano, all of that. If it happens always at the same time, then kids just go and do it automatically. It just becomes what we do in our family, and they don't question it, and it doesn't become this never-ending nagging and coercing and bribing and all of that. Like at our groups, I'm not a big structure person in general. I'm pretty go with the flow and stuff. But our groups, at a certain time is cleanup time. Everybody knows that. I never have to say it's cleanup time. Everybody just does it. It's magical. It's just the structure. And I know initially it starts out just the parents doing it. But the kids pick up on what the parents are doing, and then they're joining in, and then it's just what we do, and it's not a chore or anything. So it really helps to have structure. Good structures don't draw attention to themselves or the underlying agenda. You just put them in place. This is what we do, and then it's not this big deal about it. The more a child is stuck, the more important it is to have some structures in place. Maturation cannot be achieved overnight, but our patience will be well rewarded if we choose discipline that preserves our connection with the child and promotes maturation. So then maturation can happen naturally. We don't have to force it or anything, which doesn't help anyway. So I know that was a lot of information. Good for you if you stuck with it. And it's a lot to try, and it's a big shift to make from traditional discipline. But, we can try little things and see how they work. Try a little bit at a time. Make some changes. Don't try to change yourself and your whole life overnight or anything, and be patient with yourself in the process. And if there's anything you want to discuss with me, let me know.